Hello, hello. Is that okay? Is that okay to sound? Great. Thank you everyone for joining this panel where we will be talking about the power of art, culture, and storytelling to transform our understanding around caregiving, but also to help illuminate the future. We're really excited to be joined by some amazing panelists who are going to introduce themselves in just a little bit. And part of the reason we're talking about this is because my name is Favianna Rodriguez, and I'm the president of the Center for Cultural Power. And together with the Metta Fund and with Caring Across Generations, we have created an exhibit called When We Grow Older, which features the stories, oral histories through the lens of immigrant and Afro Latinx caregivers in California. You're going to get to hear from Maria around her experiences in that. And, when we talk about culture, culture change precedes political change, right? Often people can't vote on a policy until that idea becomes normalized inside of their imagination. And in order for that to happen, we need artists at the table, creatives, because artists and creatives have the ability to speak to our emotions and inspire our imagination in ways that research or data can't. And so today we're going to be unpacking what it means to include culture makers in this movement and what are the possibilities of culture, why we should not leave culture on the table. We should actually engage artists, filmmakers, musicians, poets, because in reality, caregiving is a value that unites us all. And living in the richest nation in the world, how do we create a culture where we can fund, support caregiving and caregivers? And so that's what we'll be talking about today. And I want to kick us off with first introducing Maria. Um, Tirado, whose story is one of the inspirations in the exhibit, and Yosimar Reyes, who's a poet. I would love to hear from both of you what, how has your own lived experience shaped how you come into the topic of caregiving, and how has that inspired you to become a storyteller? Let's start with you, Maria.
Sure. Hello. I'm very overwhelmed for being here. So please bear with me because I am a caregiver. I was a former caregiver of my parents. Um, I'm an only child of Ruby and Jorge Tirado. I grew up with my mother, as a single parent, and she had an accident in my youth, which left her unable to drive. So I didn't know I was a caregiver. So once I became able to drive, I took care of all the errands and transporting her. So fast forward, I'm in my career. In 2008, I find my father and rescued him from being a ward of the state and took him into the home. He was married to someone else at the time. We called my mother the first lady because he had three wives. And unfortunately, when I did find him, he was a victim of elder abuse and financial exploitation. So we took him in, cared for him until he passed in 2012, and he was demented. And I gave him the best care that I could while I'm still working in a career in banking. So as I was approached by my managers, they wanted me to promote within the career, but I could not because I knew my responsibility. I am the only caregiver for my parents, and again, an only child. So, with telling my story, it was very touching. I was very surprised that somebody wanted to hear my story, to be quite honest. And how it came to be is that I belong to a support group with First AME Church, and the organization was connected with the support group. And after hearing my story, they asked if I would like to feature it. And when I came to the exhibit, I said I was going to get through this without getting emotional, so bear with me. I was really surprised because I was looking for the restroom yesterday morning. I got here very early. And to see my story, first of all, in such large print was overwhelming. And it was, I don't know how to describe it because I'm a very private person, but I figured if my story can touch someone and help them share their story, because I think if we collectively share our stories and impress upon the people that can change policy, collectively we can make change. But to see your story evolve through art gives it a different perspective, and I think it enhances our stories. So thank you.
This is what's on. Is it? Okay, now it's on. Buenas tardes. My name is Yosimar Reyes. I am based out of San Jose, California. I'm originally from the state of Guerrero, Mexico. I am a poet. I am a writer. I write stories about and poems about being immigrants, about being undocumented, about being queer. And most recently, well, I've always kind of. It's interesting because I came to this work, but I take care of my abuela. My abuela is turning 89 in December. But I never use language like, because I feel like in my culture, that's what I'm supposed to do, right? Like you don't ask for it. It's like, oh, I have to, who's gonna take care of my grandma? So I take care of my abuelita. I'm her caregiver. So my poem is the video of the pictures of me juntándole crema and getting her ready to our day. And that's like a day in the life of how we live. And so I started doing a lot of work of representing my abuela, but I started showcasing my grandma because I felt like there's an invisibilized narrative of the lives of undocumented elders and what happens to these elders who are stuck in this country. And my grandma, she considers herself stuck because she wants to go back to Mexico, pero ella dice, si me regreso a Mexico, I'm gonna die missing you. If I return back to Mexico, I'm gonna die missing you. And so she's in this weird place, and then we are in this weird place because I want her to rest, I want her to live a good life, but I also know that if she leaves, then I probably won't see her again, right? Or do it. So it's just an interesting place. So I wanted to showcase kind of that. But besides the adversities of us being undocumented and care, I think like the unity and the strength that we have within each other. And so my well is my inspiration for a lot of the work that I do. I think a lot of the work that I do is based on me showcasing her strength, her ability, how witty she is, how smart she is. And so yeah, that's the poem, and hopefully the poem transmits that. And and for me, what's also important to showcase just how, for me, I feel like caregiving is one of the most sacred things that I can do to honor her because she raised me. She's the one that instilled. If people consider me to be great, it's because of her. So I think for me, it's just a way to honor that. And so yeah, that's the poem. We did it in English and in Espanol, so you can see it. So I'm really, really excited for you to share it. And now I'm doing more trabajo en español. Doing more work in Spanish porque I feel my abuelita also wants to know what I'm writing about. And she tells me all the time, I like que hablas I speak Spanglish. Like, I like to speak Spanglish. But tienes que hablar español porque tengo que saber lo que estás diciendo. So she's really, really proud that I'm here. She called me this morning. She's like, oh, I hope everything goes good for you. I'm praying that que todo salga bien. So my best sincere regards.
Thank you to both of you, and I want to ask both of you some additional questions. And we'll start with you, Yossi. So first, Yossi is very humble. Yossi is somebody whose poetry and whose theater has really humanized the experience of undocumented people through many lenses, through the lens of being queer, through the lens of caregiving, through the lens of what it means to grow up in a place of extreme wealth inequality, which is San Jose. And, you know, Yossi, the work that you're doing is impacting people on so many levels. Like when you talk about queerness, right, and being undocumented. And so I think one powerful thing about what artists do is that artists are very intersectional, right? It's not just about we're doing gender justice work, racial justice work, but actually the stories that you portray are human stories. And along the way of your journey, you've introduced us to your grandmother. You know, I follow Yossi on social media, and he takes us on the medical visits. And so not only are you an artist that's producing work, but you use all of your tools to storytell. And I wonder what has been something that you have seen where your work is transforming the narrative, whether that's feedback you're getting. Like, I'm curious how your work has resonated, given how intersectional you are.
Yeah, I'm so grateful. I think like I my work has taken different avenues because people take it. Like people, oh, I read this poem, like you should check it out, or like I saw this video, you should check it out. So it's been really, really amazing. One, I think the most impactful thing that I get on Instagram is like, oh, you remind me to call my grandma. You remind me to go. I'm like, yes, call your grandma. It's cheese time, you know, and so those things, because I think a lot of times I think one of the things that I get really frustrated is we live in such a fast paced world and our country so fast paced, and I get caught up in this time. Like, oh, I have to do this, I have to do that. But my grandma, I'm like, girl, it's okay. Running an errand with my abuela is gonna take me an extra 30 minutes. Okay, so I'm already aware. Que si me la voy a llevar a la tienda, I have to get ready because she's gonna be going running back and forth. Have to do, but I know that I have to do it because for me, running to the store is just running to the store. For her, running to the store is her day because she gets to see things. Her vecinas, you know, she has a ball like it's an alcohol outing. But I think for me, I think it's the most significant thing is that a lot of people tell me that we'll be at a restaurant eating, and I think this is what I want to write a little bit more, capture more. We're restaurant eating, and I don't know, there's something in our culture as immigrants of honoring old people or like elders. I don't know, there's this weird thing because we have so many people that come out and see my grandma, and it helps that she looks like Grandma Coco. Um, because they all like, hey, can you give me your blessing? And there's my grandma giving people blessing. But I think the other thing is other people thank me. It's like, hey, I want to thank you for taking care of your grandma because if I had my mom or my grandma, I would be doing the same thing. And I realized that my grandma symbolizes the moms or the grandmothers that these folks who migrated to this country who are they missing, who they can't be close to because, you know, of immigration status and all of that. So my grandma symbolizing something bigger. And I think my biggest accomplishment for me is for my grandma to feel revered or for her to feel like, hey, your life matter. My grandma raised us recycling bottles and cans, selling tamales, like super immigrant jobs. So now I just want her to feel like, you know, the little diva that she is. And my biggest accomplishment that I feel now that we did is we had a friend, Rafa Esparza. He created a portrait of me and my grandma. And that portrait was bought by the San Jose Art Museum, and so now it's part of the permanent art collection. So it's really awesome because now you have a big portrait, this huge wall portrait of this old little undocumented viejita. And so I took it to the museum, and I'm like, now you're part of history. Like, no one's gonna deny that for once this old viejita was undocumented was part of integral into our city. So it's been really awesome and awesome that people invite me and invite. She spoke at her first conference. I was like, girl, don't say nothing problematic. Like, girl will be going off on her rants. But now, you know, she's awesome, and I think we're fulfilling her mission in that. So I think the biggest impact is watching her confidence grow, and I think that's it. That's all I want. I want her to feel 10 feet tall. Yeah.
And what you're talking about, Yossi, and I think this is also really makes the case why it's important to support artists and storytellers. And it's amazing that Caring Across Generations has launched this type of collaboration that's really rooted in real stories. Is that artists create cultural products. Those cultural products move in cultural spaces, right? People are not just reading the news. They're going to the museums. They're looking on social media. They're looking at art. And so we need to speak to people in all of the mediums in ways that really speaks to their heart. And so the ability to support creatives, and also Yosimar, I'm sure there's a lot to be said around your ability to be your own boss, right? That through his creativity and his powerful storytelling at a time when there has not been immigration reform since 1986, right? How these artists can transform their economic realities for themselves and their families, and in turn uplift stories. There's a lot there. And speaking of stories that inspire Maria, I really love what you said, which is at first, you weren't sure how your story would resonate or how it would translate. And yet what we know about storytelling is that stories open the door to other stories, right? So when people spoke out with Me Too, stories inspire other people to speak out. And it's also so important to uplift the stories that are at the intersections, right? As an Afro-Latina woman, your lived experience is something we're not necessarily going to see on Univision because Univision is racist, right? And so I would love to hear from you that as you shared your story, what was it like for you to work with artists? What did it awaken in you? And did it change something in you in terms of how you tell your story?
Well, first of all, I told my story. I really believe that because of my mother, who was a fierce activist, and she was fighting so hard to get her story in the public eye to make change. She was very much aware of civil and social injustices. That's how I grew up. So I feel like I'm the second generation of being part of advocacy. As I was caring for her during hospice, and when I would take her out, she would always talk about the healthcare system and how it was unfair and the disparities for Black and Brown people. And so wherever she went, she would try to tell her story. So with me being involved in this collaboration, being a care fellow and collaborating with the artist, I feel like not only if I'm telling of my story, but her story is being kept alive as well, because it's important to have it documented. The change that is necessary, the change that has happened, that has occurred in the past, what still needs to be done currently, and participating in this, it gives me the motivation to continue. And whatever I can do to help be part of the change, I'm willing to do, because it is necessary. Care is necessary, because without care, the society will just, we won't have a society. I'll just say it that way.
Right. Thank you. Anna, you are joining us as a funder in this space. And I think, of course, you all have heard, oh, we need narrative strategy, we need cultural strategy. And yes, we do. And often we don't include artists in that. And actually, often the folks who get hired to tell the stories are these big communications firms, as opposed to the authentic storytellers themselves. So I'm curious, tell us why this was a meaningful collaboration for you, and just like what values do you all hold when supporting this kind of work?
Sure. And I also want to say just thank you, Caring Across, for bringing us all together at this event. I know it was so much labor, and so appreciative to be here with all of you. So Metta Fund is a private foundation based out of San Francisco, no affiliation with Facebook. We focus on elders impacted by racial injustice. And in California, the state is rapidly aging, and about 1/3 of our elders are living at or below the poverty line. And that's just not right. So at Metta Fund, we really, it's one of our institutional goals to change that narrative and really make people aware that aging is an equity issue. And we need to reframe the narrative on aging and have more hopeful stories and bring to light joy and dignity and love between folks who care for each other. But I have a really supportive CEO, Janet Spears, is in the audience, and my board member, Jarman, and I always talk about narrative change all day long. And we know art moves people. Art moves us towards change, and we're gonna keep fighting at it.
Great. And in this collaboration that you have witnessed, what was it like? I think one thing that's really fascinating is that in these conferences, sometimes you don't always see art included in such a beautiful, masterful way. And I want to share with you that even the process of working with these artists, selecting these artists, compensating these artists to create work that is going to be evergreen, that we can showcase again and again in museums, on bus ads, right? The ability to take a story, an oral history, and turn it into something tangible, I think is very powerful. What were some of your takeaways in terms of seeing this exhibit and how this exhibit activates a space of change makers?
It's so true, but it's really that art has existed since humanity, and it's the way we tell stories and the way we feel. It's our expression and our communication. And I think everybody who walked through the art installation was really just touched and moved. And I think once people change their hearts and minds, we can build larger movements and we can really make policy change. Obviously we have to get different officials into office, but I think that's where it starts. Ending narrative is really the crux of how we get social change and how we achieve racial justice. We need to get rid of the cesspool of narratives out there and tell the untold stories. Tell the stories we haven't heard of Maria or her mom. And center those stories. I was raised by a family of artists, so I'm a little bit biased.
Thank you. And you one thing we talk about, that the power of culture is that culture is not limited by what's politically feasible. Artists don't have to be just limited to what Congress can pass or not pass. And actually, artists, on the contrary, have the ability to take us to a future space that we can feel. And for example, when we saw the world of Wakanda, that was introduced to us by an artist from my town, Oakland, California, Ryan Coogler, right? Who introduced a concept which you could see real. What that did to people's imagination is very, very powerful. And so most people are not imagining the future, what it's going to look like, right? Most people consume culture and people tell them what the future is going to look like. And really great culture makers are very compelling at that. And sometimes our opposition is very compelling at that, as we saw from the last administration, right? And so we also need to be compelling at showing what a future could look like. And I want to ask that question next, starting with you, Yossi, which is that what do you see in your big, bold imagination as a future possibility of what could exist, especially, you're talking about borders. I mean, talk about how culture shapes policy. Nature does not have borders. The earth doesn't have borders. Borders are man-made. They are imposed by ideologies. And so much of your work, Yosimar, is about challenging these borders, right? And so I'm curious, when you think about your work and how you want to move people towards a future, what is that future?
Yeah, so I think what's interesting, I write a lot about being undocumented, and sometimes people think that my writing is to persuade people to like me because, oh, if you don't like undocumented people, like maybe you listen to my story and you'll like me. I'm not really interested in that. That's not why I do the work that I do. I think my work centers undocumented people, and I feel like my goal in the future, I hope that I build the confidence of undocumented people to the point that we actually know how to defend ourselves, right? And so I think right now one of the things that's been happening with a lot of this narratives is that it's been more about convincing people or like, hey, you should like us, you should do that. And I feel like we're beyond that at this point. I was like, how do I activate the power of the community that I come from? And so I think similarly to what's happening with my abuela, where she's feeling herself now, she's a little diva. I want that. I want that for other immigrants, other folks to know, like, hey, your story is just as valid and powerful and magnificent. And I think one of the biggest things that for me, to when I'm doing writing workshops or when I'm helping other people find their story, when I'm able to see them or they perform it or see someone's read their live poem for the first time, oh my god, that like is so impactful. Like you don't, I just see the magic. It's like, oh my god, like you wrote that in like 10 minutes. I can't believe you have this talent. So for me, I think in the future, I think creating bodies of work that help us find ourselves, um, and build that confidence of a community that's already like, that's already disenfranchised. How do I help contribute to that? So in the future, I hope that's what my work is building towards. Yeah.
And I think it's important that we consider how to make ecosystems so that artists like Yosimar can thrive, right? So that artists like Yosimar can not only continue to have plays and books, but films to normalize these narratives. Because what you're saying is absolutely right. We live in an anti-immigrant world, but where are our immigrant characters on TV, right? Where are undocumented characters? One thing, and I want to share this with you, Yosimar, is also thank you for your courage in sharing the deep grief that also comes with it. In your most recent play, Prieto, which is touring right now, Yosimar is up and coming. He's up and coming. He's on a trajectory, right? In his play, you talk about how your abuelito, who used to live with you in San Jose, but then returned to Mexico, that you were unable to be there when he passed away, and neither was your grandmother, and just the deep pain that the way that borders and really state inflicted violence through borders does not allow us to caregive. And so thank you for the courage in bringing all of those things together. And I want to make the case that artists can't just produce on their own. They need an ecosystem of support, opportunities like what Caring Across Generations is doing. We'll open up the questions in just a second. Because these artists, through their lived experience and through their sensibility, are able to open up channels that we can't even dream of. And I want to stress that because this is why we need artists at the table. And Maria, speaking about your view of the future, tell us what is some of your big and bold vision, and give us a little bit of an a aspect of what are some of the campaigns or pieces of legislation that you're working on now or you're excited about.
Well, first of all, I just wanted to say with having the honest conversation of saying that African American women were rooted in caregiving and speaking to that, I was very proud to see that because that's an honest conversation. I mean, and the injustices that African Americans have to deal with and what we had to overcome, I'm just happy that that was brought to the forefront in this conversation. As far as what I would like to see for the future is getting the information out there because everyone that has been speaking today and yesterday has talked about care is very vital and important, and it goes across all lines. It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, your economic status. Everyone will either provide care or receive care. I would like to see somewhat like the care blocks happen. I've always thought about intergenerational villages where you have people living in communities like a lot of the people of color live. We've gotten away from community and we've become very individualistic, which has been shared throughout this conference. But it takes community, it takes a village. I mean, that's the African proverb which was the beginning of humanity.
That's right.
It takes a village. And because my family's so small, losing my parents, I've lost my village. However, I have a sisterhood, and they take part of the village, but it's not the same when it's your blood. However, your relatives are not always the best people that will treat you well. So sometimes you create your own family. So that's why I think the intergenerational villages would be something that I would like to aspire to. And I don't know, as far as the legislation piece, where that would begin, but I'm willing to learn because I come from a personal aspect, and because I'm so enraged on how people are treated that need care, or people that need to provide care. I came from a corporate sector. Yes, FMLA was in place, but because it was a sales position, I was held to my same quotas. So therefore, I couldn't meet it as the care increased. So I was let go. And it was, I felt it was very inhumane. And I'm glad to hear in this conference that the private sector is trying to become a little bit more understanding of the caregiving needs. So that's a step forward. We are having, I heard our senator speak, and I'm hoping and praying because some of our politicians, once they get in office, they don't always move forward in the campaign that they share with us, but hopefully you have to remain optimistic. So I'm really praying that the legislation that's coming forward, especially with California being the forefront of making change, my plan is to get more involved in the legislation piece, and whatever it is, whatever it takes, if it means flying here and there, uh, going to Washington, wherever I can share my story or support someone else. Um, in someone else's endeavors, because with numbers we can get things done.
Thank you, Maria. And I'm so excited about your vision, actually, and I really hope that we can turn your vision around intergenerational village. And in culture we say there's nothing new under the sun, right? This is not a new idea. It's actually an ancestral idea that
Absolutely.
colonialism and white supremacy erased from us. And what culture offers us is the ability to return to our ancestral ways and to reimagine boldly. Not even, and it's actually, culture is about worldview shift. This is not just fighting white supremacy, patriarchy, colonialism. It's around, no, we need a whole nother worldview, because those systems have actually always exploited humans and the earth. And so I love, yeah, and I love what your vision is. And that I think that's something, imagine if we see those things normalized, right? It will lead to the real experimentation. So thank you so much for that, Maria. We only have about 6 minutes left, and I know there may be some questions. And if we might see Yosimar have to slip out, he has to catch a plane. So let's take a few questions in our last few minutes together. Yes.
I have a question. I'll take the. Yes. Okay. Tomorrow, hear me. Hi. Thank you all for being here. One, I just want to also point out there are 2 other people in the room who participated in the When We Grow Older installation, Maria Sanchez and Cecia Alvarez. Their stories are also featured. But my question is, I think one thing that art can do, and I think that this exhibit that we collaborated on together does really beautifully, is actually invite us into the world and that we imagine together. The art that we see depicted in the installation are beautiful representations of what it looks like when we honor and care for our elders, which I think many cultures within America do already, but sort of dominant society doesn't. Therefore, we have a gross lack of care infrastructure. So I just want to hear from each of you what your vision is for the future of aging, I know Maria, in your story that is exhibited, you lay out some really beautiful hopes and dreams for yourself, which I think is a beautiful reminder that we can always keep dreaming, and there's so much more life to live, and we're so lucky. And so I just think it'd be beautiful to hear that from each of you.
For me, I would just like to see our elders revered and held in high regard because they have laid the path before us, and to honor our ancestors because without them we wouldn't be here. So I think it needs to be a shift in how we respect our elders, treat them well, um, love them, let them know you love them. Spend your time with your elders and make sure they have the best care possible. Um, but in doing that, as far as the caregiver is concerned, some of us have to leave our careers or make adjustments in our own lives or caring for, that we're sandwiched. Luckily, I did not experience that, so I could give my full attention to my aging parents. But in doing so, what happens when we need to return to the workforce? What happens when we need care? We need to make sure that we have the infrastructure in place to take care of ourselves as well, to remain self-sufficient and not to be a burden on others. Or I don't want to say a burden, but we're very empathetic and we're very giving of ourselves, but in turn, what happens when we need to, I guess, resume our lives? So I just really think that yeah, caregivers, it's bittersweet, but we do it because it's out of love. I hope that answered your question.
Yes.
And that's what I was gonna say. I hope for love in the future. We don't have enough of that, and we just have too much capitalism. Yeah. And I grew up and I'm from a country in Europe that has universal care and where parents get up to 3 years family care after they have children, and where there's elder care readily available. Before my dad passed, he had around the care clock, for all of us, but also the state provided that. So that's what I wish for this country. Yeah.
Thank you. Um, uh, Thank you, Maria, also for sharing so much around what it was like to caretake for your parents. I also took care of my father as he passed away from cancer. And I believe that my father died because of all the toxicity that he was exposed to as a dental technician and janitor and just all of the chemicals. And I also grew up in a polluted neighborhood. And I have sometimes so much rage for the ways in which these systems, they are slowly killing us, whether it's environmental racism or the food injustice, right? And so my hope, and I'm 45, I'm a single woman, I don't have kids. And one thing me and my friends talk about, my other single women of color friends, right? Because we are also, we're in a love crisis, y'all. Seriously, capitalism has really become to the point where people are in such survival mode that we have eroded ways to connect with each other. It's why we have a mental health crisis.
Yes.
And I taught my women of color friends are amazing women, right? And so we just talk about like, man, we need a culture shift change around many things, especially love. And we talk about our community. We're talking about buying land, right? We're talking about how to get ready for the climate crisis because the government is not going to come save us. We've learned that from Katrina. We've learned it from Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. And for me, one thing as a culture maker, I'm like, I don't turn on the TV and see people living in community. right? It is, people can't even imagine it. In fact, we are in such this nuclear family. You just care about your little family. You don't want the whole NIMBY thing where you don't want affordable housing in your neighborhood, right? We have that deeply needs to transform, because I really truly believe that when we return to our villages and to caring for our elders together and raising our kids together, we all win. And so I'm interested in that. I want to support people in thinking now about how we care for each other in a planet that's boiling. That not only do we have the failure of policies, we have environmental catastrophe coming to us. And how do we think about creating mutual aid networks, all that? And I'm really interested in normalizing that in culture. And so, it's just, our panel has been super inspiring, because it reminds me actually that we all want that. We all want the village. And if we already want it, let's really make that. So thank you everyone for this wonderful panel. Thank you to all of the mujeres, the women who offered their stories, because your stories are the real deal. Your stories is what inspires us as creators, right? We don't need a high-paying media company to tell us what your stories are. You speak your stories in a way that moves people, and we then can use our magic powers to make those, and it also gives us the courage. Thank you so much, everyone, and thank you to Caring Across Generations for supporting this project.
Thank you.